today. His name is Michael Jennings. I've been advertising him as a church consultant and researcher. Let me tell you a little bit about his educational background. He earned his bachelor's degree at Tennessee Temple University in speech communications and the Bible. He actually also taught at that university for 6 years. Then he earned a Master of Arts degree in New Testament Studies at Northwest Baptist Seminary, which is in Tacoma, Washington, and then earned his PhD at the University of Leeds overseas. He's been in pastoral ministry chiefly in Tennessee and Washington, Tennessee and Washington for 30 years. He's a member of the Society for the Study of Christian Spirituality. Has given numerous presentations for the Evangelical Theological Society. And he's here today with his wife Jennifer. They have 2 daughters, Krista and Joy, and most importantly, granddaughter Madeline is back there as well. And she's enjoying her pizza. I can see that from here. So that's great. The topic today is a topic that Michael's been researching extensively for some time now. The official title is Stuck in the Middle Between Faith and Life, Emerging Adults in Christian Formation, but we're really talking now about Christian formation and its application to this group that we call emerging adults, or I would call them millennials, or that age group that has been the focus of my ministry. So I'm looking forward to learning a lot, and I'm sure you are too. So without any further delay, let's welcome Michael Jennings.
Thank you, Dr. Gates. Thank you for being here today. It's a privilege to present at the University Religious Forum. Dr. Gates has asked me to present the findings from my research, what I learned, and I'm going to largely focus on the description of the tensions, the specific tensions that my participants experienced while they were reading their Bible. My PhD research at the University of Leeds in Leeds, England, had to do with the Bible readings of emerging adults. And so I did a year-long qualitative research project to try to glean and understand how they actually read Scripture. Just a brief side note about the differences between a brief difference between qualitative research and quantitative research. Quantitative research is typically associated with surveys and polls, and qualitative research with interviews and observations. And there is a great benefit to snapshot surveys, but they just give you a snapshot and things can change over time, right? And the great benefit of a year-long interview schedule with my participants was that it offered a way to think about and think through how they considered their relationship with God and how they read the Bible. And so that was the important factor for my methodology. If you just think about the recent presidential election and the stunning result, you can see some of the limitations of surveys and polls. And in fact, the most beneficial studies that I've read regarding the country's views about the presidential candidates, came from 2 people who actually traveled the country and researched things. Mr. George Packer of The New Yorker and Mr. James Fallows of The Washington Post. They did deeply intensive studies of sat down with people and talked with people and interviewed them over and over and over again, and came up with actually quite a prescient outlook about the outcome of the presidential election. So that's the benefit of a qualitative study. And so I studied 9 British emerging adults, and they were between the ages of 19 and 26. They were male and female, roughly equally. They participated in the life of a particular church, an evangelical charismatic church in Leeds, England, called Mosaic Church. They attended university, most of them, and they were concerned about their faith and how to relate it to their lives. And so I got involved with them. I immersed myself in with the lives of these young people. I went to the church services with them. I spent hundreds and hundreds of hours talking with them, going to their Bible studies, sitting in on their prayer meetings, attending their parties, going to the pubs, just learning from them, trying to absorb and understand how they thought about the Bible and their readings of the Bible. And as a result of this, I saw something peek its head up out of all of this data that said there's quite a revelation here. There's some kind of a deep-seated anxiety in their lives. They're very, very nervous about their faith and its longevity. Is it durable? Is it a reliable faith? Well, let me give you just an example of how I arrived at this. Over the interview schedule, I would have them read selected passages of Scripture, and one of these passages of Scripture came from Mark chapter 6. And there were a number of responses on verse 34 of that chapter. And part of that verse reads, Jesus had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. Maybe you've heard that verse. Well, here are just two of the responses. This is Andrew. Andrew's getting on in his life, but he needs some direction, and he feels that deeply. When he read the verse, he identified himself with the sheep. He says, I'm lost, I'm confused, I'm wandering about. He also says that he experiences an emptiness in his relationship with God. Earlier in his Christian life, he felt close to God, especially when he was praying. I've known God, I'm speaking to God, I've known that He's hearing me. Now I'm just talking to myself. So he wants to recover this missing spiritual intimacy. I want to text God and just get a text back from Him, he said. Lee read the same verse. And guess what? This image of crazed, blind followers came to mind as he read the verse. The Mark passage goes on to say that Jesus' followers ran on foot from all the towns in order to meet with him. Lee recalled seeing a TV clip of paparazzi waiting for Britney Spears, and when she emerged, they rushed to follow her every move. And so that image came to mind as he was reading the verse. And he said, hey, I'm very cautious about people who go to church, the ones who are really crazy about going to church. He said, maybe they focus too much on going to church or on the pastor, and they forget the purpose of it. Now, Lee goes to church, but he says he doesn't want to get carried away and start doing things without thinking about them first. And so he said, if I just do it because everyone else is doing it, then I'm missing something. If I don't understand something, I question it. That's the right thing to be doing, and I built my faith on really strong foundations by doing that. And that was the overall message that I got from the verse. Now, as a researcher, I wanted to know what it was that was going on in the hearts and minds of these readers. One of them reads the verse and he is struck with this unsettling distance from God. And then another reads the verse and he sees in it a warning that his faith is best built by questioning and not by blind following. Never mind what the verse actually says. Let's set that aside for a while. And let's focus on what it is that's happening in the hearts and the minds of these readers. What's taking place inside of them. And so it was Bible readings like these that opened the door for me to the discovery of the existence of a deep-seated anxiety about faith. And this anxiety, this nervousness, really impacted their understanding of their faith and their relationship with God. And so I found them to be stuck between their concerns about their faith and the uncertainties of their lives. And so in the next few minutes, what I would like to do is serve as a tour guide, and I want to show you something of the dynamic and the complex world of emerging adulthood, about the anxiety that my participants felt about their faith in their life. And so I want to get into their heads, and I want you to follow along so that you can sense what's happening inside of them, to see their concerns, to feel their tensions. I want to put some faces on the figures about emerging adulthood, and I want to put some feelings behind the facts. And so my approach today will be simply this. I would like, first of all, to look at some of the intense concerns that my participants had about their Christian faith. And then I want to stop and analyze some of the formative dispositions that my participants had toward Christianity. Finally, I want to look at a few practical issues, some of the factors that had a decisive impact on the faith formation of my participants. And so that's the game plan for today. That's our travel itinerary. And so first of all, what is emerging adulthood? At the turn of this new millennium, Dr. Jeffrey Arnett of Clark University coined the term emerging adult or emerging adulthood, and he offered a theory about it, and I want to visit that theory. He basically argues that this phase of emerging adulthood expresses something about the significance of this critical transition between adolescence and adulthood. It is a cultural stage, and like other previously identified life stages in the life course, such as childhood and adolescence and adulthood, he then labels and leverages in there, wedges in there this concept of emerging adulthood. And he says this critical phase occurs between the years of the teenagers and into their 20s, roughly between the years of 18 and 29. And so he says this period of time, an extended period of time, is marked by youthful searching. Emerging adults are in a search for a self-fulfilling life, a self-fulfilling and deeply intense love, and a great job. And so they want this difference-making job big time, and they're willing to take extra time in order to find it. More about that in a second. So this period of time in their life is really about learning who they are and finding out what it is that they really want and what it is they would like to do with their lives before they settle down. Before I settle down, I need to find time for myself and do what I can while I can. I want to see what's possible before I get on with doing something really unforgettable with my life. And I'm confident that I'm really going to get everything that I want out of my life. And so these are some of the attitudes that he's encountered. Well, it's no wonder that emerging adults tend to delay marriage and parenthood. In 1960, the median marriage age in the U.S. was in the early 20s, 20 for women, 22 for men. Today, it's in the late 20s, 27 for women, 29 for men. So instead of getting married and having children, emerging adults find themselves caught between a relatively unencumbered adolescence and the long-term demands of adulthood. And so they are living in between these two phases, a past with complete dependence on mom and dad and a future of adult self-sufficiency. And so they really like and prize this feeling of being responsible for themselves and wanting to make and learning to make these independent decisions that were going to contribute to a good life. But they're not terribly attracted to living the kind of predictable, dare I say it, boring lives that their mom and dads have. And so they are willing to try out a variety of jobs, and they end up changing jobs an average of 7 times. And they like to take their time getting an education. It takes them 5 to 6 years to complete a 4-year degree. That doesn't even count a graduate study program. And they yo-yo from living with mom and dad to living with friends to living with mom and dad and living with friends, and so it goes and it goes. And this is how emerging adults adapt to the realities of adulthood. They launch from home to explore the world of life's possibilities before they land in a long-term adult responsibility. Hopefully along the way, they expect this outcome, by the way. They're going to have a good job, they're going to have a good love, and they're going to have a great, great life. Now, it looks to the parents like their kids are a bit of a slacker. And for the most part, emerging adults say, we're not really slacking off. What we're doing is simply transitioning into this long-term responsibility of adulthood. Some older generations tend to look at emerging adults as being a bit selfish and lazy. However, emerging adults would say in response to that, hey, look, our self-focus is really more about becoming self-sufficient than it is about being selfish. After all, identity exploration isn't all fun and games. It's really hard work. Well, so says Dr. Jeffrey Arnett. And here we are. Welcome to the strange new world of emerging adulthood. Well, in our next stop here, what I would like to address are some of the concerns that my participants shared with me about their Christian lives and their faith. My emerging adult Bible readers wanted to have confidence in Christianity. They wanted to retain it. They wanted to affirm it as an enduring way of life. But they were incredibly nervous about their faith. They had this deep-seated uncertainty about Christianity in general and their personal faith in particular. And so they were stuck in this anxious tension between Christian faith and their actual life experience. Now remember, they are young people who are seeking to live life on their own and want to be apart from their parents and be independent and self-sufficient. So here my readers expressed repeatedly these three concerns. First of all, they're concerned about the reality of Christianity. Secondly, they're concerned about the authenticity of their faith. And thirdly, they're concerned about the lack of intimacy they have with God. And so I want to share with you some excerpts from case studies that I did in my research that show this concern about these issues, and it indicates something of their urgent efforts to find a way to resolve them. The first concern is Christianity trustworthy? Helen was reared in a Christian home. She valued her faith. She talked with God regularly as an adolescent. But she had this crisis of faith at university, where there she ended her relationship with her boyfriend, and she felt abandoned by God as a result. And she began to question the reliability of her Christian faith. Is it really real? So she was concerned so much about losing her faith that she attended the Alpha Course, a 6-week series of talks on the basics of Christianity, sponsored by Mosaic Church. And she thought that these talks would help her to address this matter in her life. There were questions. Could she trust God again? Is Christianity real? These things guided her involvement. Lee did not grow up in a Christian home, although he attended church a few times with his mom. And he describes himself as being quite logical. And he questions the Bible's accuracy, Jesus' divine nature and miracles. And he's concerned about the conflicts between Bible and science, especially as it regards the biblical account of creation. As a new Christian, Lee says it's not about being sure anymore. And he sees his uncertainty about Christianity as providing an opportunity for him to explore his newfound faith. But his concerns persist. I still have the same questions, he says. He wants to be sure and not just accept what he's been told. Deborah believed in God, even though she grew up in a non-Christian home. She first attended church when she was 18, and this was a part of her effort to hang on to God. Deborah experienced doubts about God's existence after she became a Christian. She would talk with her non-Christian boyfriend about her concerns, and she would find herself thinking, well, maybe it's all just a big joke, and it's not really real. And her doubts made her feel very, very vulnerable. I wonder if I'm just being dragged along by a load of weirdos who believe in something that's not really there. But they've had this feeling, so they decided, well, it must be God. I sometimes doubt whether he exists at all. A second concern, is authentic faith possible? My emerging adults wanted to avoid the pretense and superficiality of the mere acceptance of their childhood faith. They were willing to roll up their sleeves and make the demanding efforts required in order to make Christianity their own. But it was very important for all of them to understand why they believed Christianity, as opposed to simply accepting it because they had been conditioned to believe it. And so an easy acceptance of their childhood faith created problems for them. They had to own this tension in order to become an adult. The tension between a ready-made faith and a grown-up version of belief. Andrew is in the midst of a crisis over his childhood faith. He believes that there's truth to Christianity and that it offers a better life in the long run. But he's concerned because he's now come out of his Christian bubble, the bubble of his childhood faith. And he finds himself questioning a lot. I'm questioning my faith in terms of, is this really me? Or is this just what I've been brought up to believe? Given his doubts about these things, he's searching for a personal connection with God that has eluded him. I want a relationship with God, but I don't know what it means, he says. Simon has doubts about his childhood religion being true and real. He wonders if his Christian faith is due more to his religious conditioning rather than its merits. And I was born into a Catholic family, he says. I was christened and baptized and everything. So even at a young age, I couldn't speak for myself. He says he's a Christian, but he adds, I don't totally believe in everything Jesus did or what Jesus says. Yet, he says, I want a more total, complete faith. Kevin finds himself to be lacking confidence. He wants to have confidence in his faith, and he wants to believe what the Bible teaches, but he finds himself between views of the Bible. There's a difference between Mosaic Church's view that everything in the Bible is true, as he put it, and his father's view that questions its historical reliability. And so he struggles with these. I'm just not confident in what I believe. I'm stuck between the two. He thinks the Bible is from God, and he questions if it's really true. And he wants to think about this deeply, because I want to be behind everything that's Christian. There's a third concern my participants expressed, and that is, can I experience intimacy with God? Many said they felt distant from God, and they found this to be deeply unsettling. The distance that they had shaped their perception that there's something terribly missing in their faith and in their lives. And spiritual experience then played a significant role in coming to terms with their questions about Christianity and the gap between their faith and their lives. They needed to be close to God daily. God's presence gives Deborah a reassurance that what I'm doing in my life is coming straight from God. Being close to God helps her to address her doubts, especially as a new Christian. When you go from being a non-Christian to a Christian, there's the transitions stage. You know, you think the non-Christian world is the real world, and you're going into this new world where I see things differently now that I'm a Christian. So Deborah believes that God's presence in her life is going to help her address this tension. But the lack of His presence creates an additional problem. I don't think He's a constant presence. I've said these prayers. God, I've really tried, but I just don't know where You are. Kevin wants to direct God to direct his life, and this is especially the case in regard to his daily decision making. He believes that God has a really good plan for his life and that he wants to do right and he wants to become a better person. But he's not really certain about the choices that he's making, that they are in fact God's will for his life. Maybe that's God talking to me, or that's just me saying what I really want. Lee sometimes feels quite distant and far from God. He recounted one experience when God felt really close, like He was right beside me in the car. But he hasn't had that experience since. And he yearns for this kind of experience as a regular feature of his life. So as you can see here, my emerging adults were on a quest to resolve their anxieties. Is Christianity true? Do I have real faith? Is God really there? And they desired to retain Christianity and yet wanted to be very honest about their concerns. And here they are, stuck in the middle. Well, we've come now to our next stop, and here I want to look at 3 formative dispositions that my emerging adults shared with me. There were 3 themes that came out here about these dispositions, and these dispositions really reflected an overall orientation toward Christianity. These themes emerged from the interview data. Some participants showed signs of a gradually disengaged faith. Other participants gave evidence of a contested faith. And then there were some who clearly accepted and believed in Christianity, but they talked about their incomplete faith. And as a result of these responses, I began to think a little more and realized, hey, these basic dispositions offer a way to think about how these young people actually retained Christian faith or disaffiliated from it. And so let's look at the accepted faith, the incomplete faith disposition. This refers to those in the study who claimed an adherence to Christianity, but sensed that there was something missing, something vital was lacking in their lives. They were very loyal to their Christian friends, they were very regular in church attendance, yet they freely admitted that something was missing that was basic to faith, and that their faith in some way was limited or deficient because they didn't have this missing ingredient. So they were looking for the secret sauce. And there was something that in that sauce that would give them a full faith experience and would fill in these missing gaps. Well, Clara took Christianity for granted. I just stopped trying to find out more because I thought I knew it all. She attended church since she was 10 years old. She became a Christian at 16. She was confirmed at 17, but she's not really sure why she's a Christian. If people ever ask me why I'm a Christian, I wouldn't be able to answer because I don't actually know. I believe it, but I don't know why I believe it. She's not sure of the difference that Christianity has made in her life. I think it's quite hard to say that I act this way because of my faith rather than I just act this way anyway. She's not had the big changes in her life that she sees in other Christians. There's something that they're getting that I wasn't getting, she said. And this set in motion a search to find a vital connection with an absent God. I felt like I was just praying to a brick wall and that there was nothing there. God's absence in her life made her feel like she wasn't a Christian. It made her think that her faith was a bit superficial. She said, I believed it in my head, but not in my heart. And she wanted this to change. She wanted to feel it. She wanted to have an effective connection with God. And her attendance at church services and small groups had a mixed effect on her, however. On the one hand, these resources helped her to identify or define that there was something missing in her life, and they offered her a promising way in order to close this perceived gap between head and heart. But on the other hand, church reports of dramatic spiritual experience contributed to her increasing anxiety that there was something really important that she was missing. And so near the end of our interview schedule, Clara was still searching for the missing piece to the puzzle of her life. Her search for a definitive spiritual experience had eluded her. It's quite a step to actually accept that you're not going to necessarily know, she said. In the meantime, she's middling along, as she put it, with a more settled sense of faith, even as she continues to address the perceived gap in her life. She's determined to stick with her faith, believing that God has a plan for her and that God's going to be there for her. The next disposition is that of contested faith, and this category refers to those emerging adults in the study who experienced an intense contest of competing belief systems. Their commitment to faith was not fixed, but fluid and unfolding. It was marked by doubt and indecision. They wanted to retain their Christian belief, but competing viewpoints challenged their faith commitment. They were unsure how to resolve this difficult question, and the process was ongoing, very open-ended. They held contradictory views and practices. They looked to the church, however, to help them find a grown-up version of faith. Simon is caught on the horns of a dilemma. He's divided between his desire to believe Christianity and his concerns with the truth of it. There is this mingling feeling in me, he says, which says, yeah, it might be true, but it might also not be true. So don't put all your eggs into one basket. Don't completely trust it, although I'd like to. His dilemma is related to his concerns about his childhood faith and the intellectual challenges he encountered at university. He fears that the religion of his upbringing, his childhood, conditioned him to accept things about Christianity that might not actually be true. And so Simon's skepticism extends to the Bible. I don't know whether to take the Bible as literally true, the Word of God, or more of a historical document. He says he wants to believe it, but I don't want to accept it because I've been told, oh, it's the Word of God, it must be because it's such a powerful book. And even though he's plagued by his doubts and he doesn't want to lose his childhood faith, he counts himself as a Christian. I think you can be a Christian and not be 100% true believer in Jesus. Steinman started attending Mosaic Church. He first got involved with the Alpha course. It just got my mind ticking again and asking questions. Near the conclusion of the course, he said, I have a hunger to experience my beliefs. And he began to attend church services. And the sermons there and the conversations with people there got him thinking more about the Bible and about his faith. And now he says he wants to have a stronger faith. He says he thinks he knows a way where he can have this, where he can achieve this outcome. Simon believes that the way to resolve his dilemma is to have a convincing, dramatic experience that would serve as overwhelming proof of the validity of Christianity and the authenticity of his faith. When asked what such an overwhelming feeling, excuse me, when asked what such an overwhelming feeling would do for him, he replied, it would be further proof of things that have been preached to me and that I'm reading. I mean, if I had a vision or a voice that came to me and I already have faith, then that experience confirms my faith and gives my faith some strength. And so he views the prospect of a convincing spiritual experience as offering him a compass, just so I know where I'm at in life. And so Simon prayed for a divine intervention over which he has no control. Such a sign from God would be evidence of the reality of Christianity beyond his Catholic conditioning. Our third and final disposition is that of disengaged faith, and this category reflects the experience of religious disaffiliation. That is, there's a loss of contact with church and Christian friends. Some in the study expressed a deep dissatisfaction with Christianity that led to their eventual disengagement with it. Andrew is bitter towards the church. He is critical of the Christian bubble in which he was raised. Leaders in his hometown Baptist church required that he break up with his girlfriend in order for him to take the step of being baptized. He now regrets that he followed their advice and their direction in his life. He feels very naive and stupid for doing what was asked of him. His assessment of his childhood faith is that it's generated an intense reaction, has resulted in an intense reaction to this rules and regulations version of Christianity that embitters him. Andrew finds Mosaic Church's approach to be preferable to that of his home church. It's not as much do's and don'ts, he says. He was involved with Mosaic Church off and on for 4 years, attending church services more regularly in his last year at university. He played football on the church team. He participated in the Alpha course as a co-host at one of the tables. But he eventually stopped attending church services. Andrew thinks God should be accessible to him apart from the mediation of church. I don't need to go to church to experience God. God's going to meet me wherever I am. If He's there, I'm happy to accept the basics. But going to church, what's the actual relevance of it? If the Holy Spirit's in us and showing us how to do it, then it should be internal between me and God. He said that going to church and ticking off all of the Christian boxes like Bible reading have served as an obstacle to his actual experience of God. I shouldn't have to read a book, even if it is the Bible, to have a relationship with God. Why can't I have a relationship with God like I have a relationship with you or anyone else? Why can't I just enjoy God's company? And why can't He make His presence felt to me in a way that I enjoy it? Andrew shut the door on the church, but keeps it open to God. He said he's very open to God's intervention in his life. I'm open to God stepping into my life at any point and letting me know He's there. I'd quite like it if God had some sort of divine expression towards me. I'd like a relationship with God if He's there. Such an experience would help him to settle matters. It confirms to me that He's there and that He is who He says He is, despite all the questions and the confusing things that come with that. Andrew told me that he felt emptiness all the time since his decision to disaffiliate. Some days I feel like I've lost something. This was very disorienting to him. It wasn't unusual for him to wake up in the morning and ask, what's going on? Where do I stand? He thinks that this is all part of growing up and not being a kid anymore. And he wonders if his desire for a relationship with God will ever be satisfied. I'm open to God stepping in and doing something in me, but it's going to take more than just speaking to somebody to do it, because that doesn't satisfy. Has to be God. Well, on our final stop on the itinerary, let's look at some of the factors that had a decisive and shaping impact on the faith formation of my emerging adults. There were three common factors that I observed among my participants. Number one, church matters. Church matters. My emerging adult participants saw institutionalized religion as offering a promising way to resolve their faith life anxieties. They didn't see church as a crutch. And finding a church away from home was very important. They tended to look for churches that were quite different than the churches they had attended as a teen or a child. Now, the Barna Group reported recently that 59% of emerging adults with a Christian past disaffiliate from the church or lose their faith. And researchers report that somewhere between 15 and 21% of emerging adults actually attend church. So why did my emerging adults go to church? And I found three reasons for this. First of all, they felt intensely their loss of childhood faith and their closeness to God. Drifting from Christian faith was a deeply unsettling experience for them. They were very motivated to do something about this, and church offered a way to address it. Second issue regarding why they went to church. Connecting with others who were in the same boat was a pretty big deal to them. They were not alone. They found other people just like them. They weren't the weirdos, and now they could talk about it and find resources to help them. Three, I found that the churches were really valued, and they were attracted to the churches that offered special resources to address the concerns of emerging adults, like the Alpha Course and small groups with specific curriculums. These things were like magnets, and these emerging adult participants took advantage of these resources. A second factor that had a decisive impact on their faith formation: friends matter. The most influential factor in the search that my participants were making about their faith was their friends. Their friends carried a disproportionate amount of influence. My emerging adults talked with both Christian and non-Christian friends in order to help them identify and address issues. And they saw these social networks as very valuable for thinking through issues, and they encouraged each other to talk and evaluate the issues that were pressing them in their lives. Even if some of their Christians called into question the things that they had accepted as true, they encountered it, they invited it. And so these participants said that these kinds of relationships made it possible for them to get opposing viewpoints. A number said that they took ideas from one group and they used them as talking points with the other. And so they said that these kinds of interactions helped them and aided them in forming their own beliefs. Sociologist Robert Wuthnow talks about this phenomenon. He says the emerging adults tinker, his word, tinker with multiple viewpoints, and I found this to be very much the case. I also noted that their faith concerns tended to endure the longer they maintained involvement with these different networks. In the end, one group usually won out over the other. For example, those in the contested faith category tended to have a higher number of contacts with Christian friends than non-Christian. And there was a tendency among those in the disengaged faith category to have a higher level of contact with non-Christian friends than Christian ones. And the choice to move toward disengaged faith was accompanied by an increased frequency of contact with non-Christian friends. And this shift was also marked by fewer contacts with Christian friends and an eventual disaffiliation from church. A third factor that had a decisive shaping effect on the faith formation of my emerging adults was mentors. Mentors matter. It made a real difference. The mantra of my emerging adults is, make my decision for my reasons. And we've noted how the decision-making approach here is very important, and it is part of the experience of becoming self-sufficient, independent, of becoming a responsible adult. Someone said to make my own decisions is to feel more like an adult. So I discovered an insider's secret, however. My emerging adult participants sought the input of authority figures in their lives. They talked to church leaders. They talked to their parents in order to help them make sense out of their faith life issues. Now, they didn't always let onto it, but they clearly valued mature mentors in their lives, and this was a big reason of why they went to church. And so you can see that these issues here regarding church, friends, and mentors really were important and made a big difference in the emerging adult faith of my participants. Well, it's been a joy to be your tour guide today. We have looked at some of the intense concerns that my emerging adults have had about their Christian faith. We've analyzed some formative dispositions that guided their connections to Christianity, and we've looked at a few practical factors that had a decisive shaping effect on their faith formation. So this has been an exciting trip today, and I hope you got the sense about life and faith that my emerging adults felt, and the way they saw things, and the way they thought about them. Do any of these issues ring true in your life? If so, then maybe you're motivated to talk about them with someone, and I hope you do. Thank you, and I hope happy to take some questions. I hope you have them. Yes, sir.
I got two. One quick. I missed the verse that was used as a test question.
Mark chapter 6, verse 34.
Okay, Mark 6:34. Now, did I understand correctly that these students you interviewed were in England?
Yes.
England, of course, has lost its religion, as
Yes.
has Europe. How does that compare to students here, then?
That's a very interesting question. The question is how the study was based in England with British emerging adults. It's a different social, cultural context than America. And your point is?
They have had declining religious influence
Right.
ahead of us.
Right.
We're in it now.
Right.
How would that compare to students here, in your opinion?
And the question is, how would that compare, given the declining influence of faith in that society versus the impact of faith in the American society? One evidence of the impact of evangelical faith in American society is that 4 out of 5 white evangelicals voted for Donald Trump. 81% is the statistic that's reported. In fact, one article goes so far as to say that the white evangelical right elected Donald Trump. So there is still a strong faith component in American society that's not very present in British society. And this is one of the things that tweaked my interest in the topic of emerging adult faith formation. Why is it that these young people in this particular culture are interested in Christianity at all? Why do they want to retain it when they are the odd ones, they are the outliers? And so it offered me an interesting insight, a portal into a different kind of a world. I found that the British emerging adults took matters that I studied, took matters of faith much more seriously than many of the American counterparts that I've encountered. There's a sense in which, because the stew is already thickened with faith and belief, you turn on the radio, you hear it. You turn on the TV, you hear it. You read in the newspaper about faith and religion. It is a factor of our life. And so therefore, it is not as readily challenged. It's not under an existential, a threat of existential termination, like many feel in England. And so you can, is this too harsh a phrase? You can rest on your laurels because there's a social consensus that carries you. And so in England, I found this a more intense personal concern, and they were really, really careful and really motivated to address this issue, even though they were highly skeptical. I don't always see that in America. Does that help? Does it ring true with you, what we've talked about? Any other questions, comments?
I had thoughts on the same topic, actually. I taught in the UK, and I thought it was fascinating how in England, all the schools are somewhat church affiliated. Initially, they were started through the church, and so every student has religious education as part of their day, no matter what school they go to. And yet, faith isn't really a part of people's lives. Where here, you know, we start every day at school with the Pledge of Allegiance, but politics isn't really very much a part of people's lives, except for these kinds of seasons. And in the UK, people are very political, not very religious. Seems like in the US, people are very religious, not very political. And it seems like whatever we try to push in the schools is what kids are going to ignore, right? And, so yeah, it struck me that it would be a lot more challenging as a young person in Britain to keep a strong personal sense of faith.
Dr. Nunez was in England, studied and taught in England, and that's a great point. Religious education, there's not the separation of church and state issue that we find here in America in England. In England, there is a promotion of religious education on all public school levels. In fact, the British government subsidizes the finances of churches. You can get up to 25% of your yearly revenue, your offering income, is subsidized by the British government. So there is not this nervous connection or lack of a connection between faith and politics in England like there is here. However, like Dr. Nunez says, and I think it's a fair point, these are the things that you are taught. And as you grow into emerging adulthood and you want to make up your own mind, these issues then are things against which you can rebel. In fact, there's some friends in England that have done a research on why this emerging new atheism in Britain. And they're kind of stunned as to how to account for the fact that so many young people so quickly self-identify as atheists at such a young age. And it's just an interesting issue. This is a phenomenon that's being studied, and no doubt this issue of religious education is a contributing factor in that matter. Great point. Thanks. What else?
Michael, what advice would you have for a church or a ministry that wants to encourage faith among the young people that you study?
The question is, what would I do? How would I counsel churches to address emerging adult faith formation? I've got an additional 3 hours on this that I could share with you. To cut to the quick, there is a difference between truth and trust pedagogies. Pedagogy is the actual linkage to how do you get from A to B, right? How do I help you move along? And churches that I have found, especially among evangelical churches, highly prize a spiritual maturity model. A spiritual maturity model emphasizes the more you know about the Bible, the better you are going to be in your faith. The stronger, the more vital. So it's a highly cognitively based pedagogy. You go to a Sunday school class, we're going to pour in a lot of information. You go to church and the sermon that's thematically based or expositionally based on biblical text, we're going to pour in more information. You go to your Bible studies, you open up a book in the Bible, you read the book in the Bible, you try to understand its historical background, its content, and then you apply it to your life. We're pouring in more information. And I actually found in Britain, some of the new Christians especially were really intimidated when they went to Bible studies. They found that the other people in the studies knew so much more about the Bible than they did, and they felt really strange. And that's largely because of the emphasis on this pedagogy of spiritual maturity is based upon biblical content. The more you know, the stronger your faith. There is another pedagogy called a trust pedagogy. And if you go to wisdom literature in the Hebrew Bible, the so-called Old Testament, you will see that in there is an emphasis on following a valued mentor. There is a focus that's quite different. There's someone who has something in life that you don't have. It's not all about information. It's about a way of life. And so this wisdom literature, this theme in these wisdom books, like Proverbs and some of the Psalms and Ecclesiastes, some of these themes in Job talk about the conversations people have, the interactions, the sharing of faith in life as having a great impact on young people, especially in Proverbs, talking about bringing young people up into a way of life. And so this trust pedagogy then has a completely different orientation than the spiritual maturity pedagogy that I see so evident in churches. And I'm not critical of a spiritual maturity pedagogy. I'm simply saying I think it'd be important to address the issues of a trust pedagogy. How do you actually trust God when you have deeply unsettling conflicts in you about faith and about the Bible? How do you actually do that? Well, how do you lead someone through that? Where are the training wheels? This is an important issue, and I encourage churches to consider developing, and I've got some materials here about how you can hold Bible studies, for example, that tap into conversations more than content, although content is a vital part of the Bible study. So this is a big deal. Did I address the question?
Yeah.
Great. Can I share with you just some final thoughts here before I move on and call it quits? This gets to the question, I think, something about the question that you asked. And it touches on a different aspect of it, and that's this. Why this decline among emerging adults in religious observance or in church attendance? The category here is emerging adult religiosity. Why have they stopped going to church, but yet still claim to want to be spiritual? So what is actually going on here? Now, right now, the millennials are many millennials are, which is a generational category and designation, are going through this emerging adult phase of 18 to 29. So they're reflecting many of these features that we see in emerging adulthood. And that many millennials are dropping out of church. In fact, in the most recent U.S. Census, 70% of millennials checked the box none. What is your religious affiliation? None. 70% of those who checked it were millennials, i.e. in this 18 to 29 age group. So why so many of them backing off of faith? Why are they not affiliating with religion? And again, I told you that something between 15 to 21% of young people actually attend church on any given Sunday. Why is that? I'm talking about the national population here. So what's actually going on here? And there are three views that have been forwarded to try to account for this. There's the coping view, there's the disconnect view, and then there's the vetting view. And the coping view is presented by Dr. Setrin and Dr. Kiesling in their book, Spiritual Formation in Emerging Adulthood. And they argue, in effect, and I think rightfully so, that the practical demands of life, of being away from home for the first time, tend to trump the role of going to church. And that church then takes a back seat. It's on the back burner because they're so busy. How do I get up in the morning? How do I get my classes? How do I go ahead and wash my clothes? How do I make sure I got food on the table? And put gas in the car if I have a car. How do I do all these things when I've largely depended upon mom and dad to do it? So practically, that is a factor, is it not? But I don't think that the reason why 70% of people don't count themselves to be religious and and something like 80% don't go to church, I don't think necessarily has to do with the fact that they didn't wash their clothes last night. I think there's something more to that, although this is part of the issue. There is the disconnect view, and this is presented by David Kinnaman of the Barna Group in his book, You Lost Me. And the basic research that the Barna Group did here said that the churches basically are not open to the doubts and the tensions that emerging adults feel. They don't actually respect their concerns. So when those concerns are actually voiced, Their responses to them by church leaders or other in the assembly, they're given these, quote, slick or half-baked answers, end quote. So their questions aren't really addressed. And as a result, they tend to reject these easy talking points because people aren't willing to get down into the nitty-gritty of the stuff that they're dealing with. In essence, the church has really left them behind, and in an effort to keep things going and keep their programs and machine moving, they're marginalized. So that's a disconnect view. Now that's a very controversial outlook, but Mr. Kinnaman has presented. I'd be interested in your point of view if you actually feel that or not. And then there's the vetting view. And this is a view I presented in my thesis, that emerging adults are actually encountering a number of viewpoints, multiple viewpoints. And they are trying at this age, at transitioning into a self-sufficient life, they're trying to identify and locate those things that are worthwhile, things that they want to actually invest in their lives. And they see the church as offering a promising way forward in life, to giving resources to help them. But you've got to be patient with them because they're vetting it, they're testing it, they're trying it out, they're exploring, they're evaluating all of these things. And so patience is being called upon, and that pedagogy of trust really requires an awful lot of patience. So, in your life, emerging adult, which of you best accounts for why you may not get up on Sunday morning to go to church? You're washing your clothes, you feel the church has dropped you, or you just don't think anybody's interested in listening to you vet your points of view. Thank you very much for your participation today. Dr. Gates, thank you, sir.
Les personnages dans mes tableaux, à me voir vivre décroché, mes idées folles devenaient